About 2 years ago, I committed myself to what this was going to be about, was me getting up here each week, sharing what my experience of putting these principles we teach here to work, or not doing that and what comes of that. And so, so it's really interesting to me how wonderful it is to have this job, because it makes me so darn accountable to having to stand up to these principles. I don't know if I would have had the discipline to do this if I didn't have a job like this that put me on display. And with me going, this is what happened to me this week in applying principle. And one of the things we did in class this week was I tasked them with the same thing. Come back next week and share how you applied principle to your week. What happened? Because that really helps in moving forward with what it is we're trying to do here. That's what makes class so great. So here's what happened this week. I'm going to be tying it a little bit to what I talked about last week, because I liked my talk so much I thought I might take my own advice. So, as I mentioned last week, I was working on the unified field theory, an equation that hasn't been solved for 100 years, and I was really getting into it. It really has kept me from going nuts about Ash being away for 3 weeks. It really has helped my sanity. And on Monday, I thought I solved it. And we started, and so I'm using AI, and we're running all these tests, and every test is coming back that it worked in every single discipline. As we're going through all the disciplines, it worked, it worked, it worked. And so when I'm not working here, I was working at that. And so Wednesday by 2 a.m., I thought we really had something, and we started talking about publishing the results of what I'd come up with. And I wake up Thursday morning, so this is from Monday. This is now Thursday morning. I wake up Thursday morning, and I'm looking over the data again, and I see something in it. And I noticed something's just not right. And so I go to chat at the AI I'm working with, and I say, did you run these tests by the protocol we set to run these tests by? And chat goes, no. And I was like, what? We set these protocols on Monday. We set them actually last week, the protocols, and it came back and said, okay, I've got these protocols. I'm going to run every test by this protocol. And Thursday morning, it's saying, no, it didn't do that. And so my first reaction was to get very frustrated and angry at all what I considered wasted time. Have you ever felt that way? Frustrated and angry? Or am I the only one who's ever had that experience? And then, less than a minute later, I was going, what am I getting frustrated about? If it wasn't for AI, I couldn't be doing this at all. It's not like I know all this calculus and these equations. It's what's been helping me work through all this stuff. I couldn't even do this, even as a hobby, even for fun, if it wasn't for AI. And that made me start thinking about, what other things do I get frustrated at, and that I'm not looking at what it is I really care about? Next thing that came up was my wife, Ash. It may not sound believable, but sometimes I get frustrated in my relationship. May sound even less believable that sometimes she does. And then I realized, and then I looked at the center and the people I interact with at the center, and sometimes I get frustrated here. And what it made me realize was that frustration is a pointer. It points to what we care about. And what matters is, since one of our tenets here is what you focus on, you give power to, am I paying attention to my frustration, Or am I paying attention to what I care about? And that was quite the epiphany for me, to see that any time I'm angry, I'm upset, I can use what I'm upset at as a pointer towards what I care about, and then feel grateful that I care about something. Because I don't know about you, but I've had times in my life when I didn't care about anything. I didn't even care about living. And that isn't true for me anymore. I love my life. Not every moment of it, but I care deeply about you in this center, about Ash, about the interactions, the things I love to do. I care about writing songs. I care about all kinds of things now. I have so much care in my life. And yet sometimes I get stuck in looking at what I'm frustrated at. Or am I the only one? See, that's the thing about it, right? And so this is why classes become so important. And you're like, oh man, he's talking about classes again. Why is he talking about classes again? There are people in this class who are also in the ACS class simply because they want to keep being in that environment of, I want to keep at this day in and day out. Now, I'm not saying to transform yourselves, you need to put yourself on display the way I do, though it helped me in my continuing transformation. But one of the things that happened recently, this same week, was I was talking to Ash, and she said, I've really noticed that whenever you start getting frustrated or angry, you switch you just go switch into this relaxed place so much faster than you used to. And when she said that, what came to me about that was, it's interesting that it got noticed, right? That's important. It really is important to get feedback that you're transforming, to know that it's actually going on. But the other thing about it is I've had this thought in mind, this practice in mind since November about becoming steady. That's it. That's been my thing, is like, when things get in a way that's starting to wig me out, how quickly can I get steady? Without stealing myself, without making myself into something I'm not, having it be the natural progression of the practice I'm doing. Do you hear what I'm saying about that? Because what I notice is if I try to steel myself to be steady, at some point I'm blowing up. Maybe you've noticed that about yourself, right? And so the key is, what is the practice that really gets us there? And I notice for me, the practice has been, can I look at what it is I care about, which I'm able to do more and more of the time, right? And it's this incremental practice. It's not something that comes overnight. One of the things we were talking about in class was what was our first spiritual experience? Mine was acid, right? And there was a time I really chased it. I chased what that felt like with mushrooms and peyote and doing all these ceremonies and did all this stuff. But in the end, I didn't get there. It was great when I was high, but as soon as I came down, it was gone. And then I started doing all these workshops, and I actually was a workshop junkie. I took so many different workshops. But in the end, the same thing happened. I still wound up being this mad guy who really was pissed at everything and wasn't liking life very much. And then finally hit me that all those experiences are pointers. They're the menu. They're not the food. They can give you a taste, They're pointers. They say, if you do the practice, this is what your life can feel like. That's what goes on with that stuff. If you do the practice, this is what your life can feel like. But then it always comes down to the practice. And so I'm up here week in and week out going, classes, 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 because people in classes practice. They don't put it aside. They don't wait till tomorrow. They're surrounded by people who are going to help them, support them, and keep in practice. And that's what this is about. If what you want is true transformation. You can have a high experience coming here on Sunday. You can have a high experience going to a workshop. You can come out of it going, yes, this is going to be my life. This is how I'm going to behave going forward. This is what's going to happen. And then, over time, it fades away. It's a pointer. And so that's what I've seen. And so I've said to myself most of my life that I'm not a very disciplined guy. And it turns out that isn't as true as I thought it was. All I do to make sure I'm disciplined is put myself on display, put myself in situations, set an environment. Let me put this a different way. What I do is set an environment that supports me in growing. So I'm surrounded by folks who are really holding me to task. The question is, are you doing that? If you really want transformation. Because what I've noticed is, my lived experience is that's what it takes. It actually takes setting up whatever environment you need that works for you. I'm not saying, that's why I'm saying you don't need to put yourself on display the way I do. And maybe you don't need class if you have another way of building an environment. But are you kidding yourself about that? Do you have an environment that supports you in making sure that you are holding yourself to the highest principles that you know are true in your life? Because that's where transformation lives. And the problem, the way I see it, and it's not really a problem, but it makes it harder, is that the observable shifts take a lot of time. I know. So here's what I noticed about my personal shifts. And it really started with plants. My plants are not the healthiest plants on the planet. But they're not doing bad. They're flourishing. And I don't know nothing about plants. But I kept being with them and had the intention that they were going to be healthy. So I created this relationship with them in which they're healthy. I'm doing the same thing with people at this center. I don't always know what I'm doing, but what I do know is that I want healthy. I want a healthy relationship. And so it isn't perfect, and it gets messy. And it's incremental. It's small, it's tiny things in that moment. Have I gotten good at not getting frustrated at all? No. But I'm getting better and better at the time frame difference. On Thursday, it was under a minute. That's something. To have it be that close for me. And to have it then be noticeable to my wife, saying, hey, you really have shifted in this way. And so, but it's been this day by day by day. I noticed my shift long before she did. I'm the one looking at it. It's my life. You're the one looking at it. It's your life. Just because somebody else doesn't notice, that don't mean it's not happening. You know what I'm saying? If you're doing it, if you're doing the work. But then you got to be honest with yourself about doing the work. And so one of the things I talked about last week was the sun, right? Putting light on what matters to you instead of spending a lot of time on what doesn't, or what matters in terms of what you want out, like pulling weeds in the garden, right? My garden is doing really well according to my standards, maybe not somebody else's, but I'm the one that matters for me in terms of my experience. You're the one that matters in terms of you and your experience, right? We all have our own personal experience here of life. So you got to be the one to say, you can't look at somebody else's life and go, well, my experience isn't like theirs, so there's something wrong with it. Though we do tend to do that, right? That's part of the practice, is can we bring ourselves to ourselves? This is what Ash is talking about all the time in terms of her sacred sovereignty. Can we bring ourselves to ourselves in a way that allows us to know for ourselves how we're doing, not in comparison to anything else on the planet? That's not easy, because we are in relationship and we are in comparison. Well, we don't have to be in comparison, but we are in relationship. So it's more like that. But being in relationship is not the same thing as comparing ourselves. In our incremental practice, we have these pointers. Class is a pointer. Class is not a practice. Class is where you learn how to apply, use the pointer to then apply it in your daily life when you get frustrated, when things are not looking the way you'd like them to look, when you think there's something else that needs to be going on. Are you thinking that because of a should? I should be more this way. I should be kinder. I'm sure many of you are going, you should be kinder. But you see, I can't get kinder through a should, because the second I'm shoulding on myself, I'm not being kind in that moment. Right? You can't get there that way. As soon as you should comes into it, you're already moved away from it instead of towards it. There is no kindness in should. I should be more compassionate. You should be more compassionate. That moves you away, not closer. So I find that if I wasn't kind, if I wasn't compassionate, notice, take stock. Get as close to the bone of that moment as possible. And prepare for the next time. So the next time comes along and you do a touch better. Maybe just a little touch better. Congratulate yourself for that. I've noticed that congratulating myself on the tiniest of little steps gives it more light. Shines a little bit more on it so that can grow a little bit better. That's what's possible, right? When you get into that level of being good with yourself, caring about yourself, because it does come down to self-love and self-care. Right? That's the ticket here. We want to grow and transform in the space of self-love and self-care, because the more we feel that, the more then we get to share it with others. I am noticing so many more gratitudes for myself these days than even a month ago. And that's what's possible when you are incremental and at it regularly, daily. Hold it as a priority. Do you hold your transformation as a priority? Or are you too busy? It's okay if you are. But just be honest with yourself about it, because it will make a difference in how you move forward in your life. Do you hold yourself in a way that's loving and caring? Or do you tend to just jump down your own throat around what you didn't do well, what you screwed up on? That's not the practice. Can you do a practice that actually brings forth what it is you want to see in the world anyway? Can you be that practice? Hold it. Hold it. Like a baby in your arms. Gently. Lovingly. That's what's possible. Every day. Every moment. You get to bring that forth. Thank you. I love you so much.